I think everybody knows who I am. Live streaming Daniel Juster, Asher's partner for almost 40 years next year. But everything we do, really everything we do, is connected to a revelation that we received about 36 years ago. And it's funny, I was just thinking the other day, I had never talked to Asher about when I received that revelation, that he had already received it at the same time, or whether, because we didn't talk about it. And I will explain. This is the restoration. This is the revelation about the restoration of the church in Israel. And it was a revelation that I received supernaturally during a devotional time with the Lord. And then we started to connect to churches that believed in the restoration of the church, and I'll explain that. And when we started to relate to this, I started to go to these conferences for leaders of these churches in 1981, 82. And Moishe Morrison, who is a partner with Eitan Shishkoff. Eitan's our other third partner with Asher for the last 35 plus years, already knew these people and was connected to them. And so he and I were the first ones going to these conferences. But everything I do really is connected in some way or another to these two passages. John chapter 17, where Yeshua said, in verse, let's see where we should start this. John chapter 17, where he said in verse 20, I do not pray for these alone, but for all those who believe in me through their word, that they may be one as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may be one in us, and that the world may believe that you have sent me. And the glory which you gave me, I have given to them, and that you in me, and they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Now, when the Lord showed me this passage, it was very clear to me that before the Lord returns, there's going to have to be something on a worldwide plane of what we call the unity of the body of believers. And most of us had never thought of that before. I mean, I was actually in a denomination where I was on a committee called the Ecumenical Relations Committee, where we represented different denominations that came together to try to have some cooperation in the city of Chicago. This is in the 1970s, ancient history, when I was doing that. But it wasn't a deep kind of unity. It wasn't the kind of thing that Yeshua was praying for here. And I came to understand that this deep kind of unity would have to be expressed locally in the cities, in the areas where different streams existed, that we would have to have some diminishing of our independent identities and come into a joint identity together. And that was, kind of a really surprising thing to see. It is funny, I had been a member of the body of believers, since 1960, and this is now 1981, so this is 21 years later, and I had never been taught this and never thought of this, and it was a totally new idea to me. But the Lord connected this as well to Ephesians chapter 4, and it's amazing how this high, exalted understanding of unity is made very practical in the book of Ephesians chapter 4. And I connected John chapter 17 and Ephesians 4 together. The Lord led me to connect them in this revelatory experience. So in Ephesians 4 we read, and he himself, verse 11, and he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, and for the edifying of the body of Messiah, till we all come to unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of the Messiah. That we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men and the cunning and craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things unto him who is the head, Messiah, from whom the whole body is joined and knit together. All right, now, there have been unity movements in the body of believers that have been very weak because they want to just come together on a feeling basis, not a truth basis. There was a pastor in our area, he used to make the statement, doctrine divides, that is teaching. Doctrine means biblical teaching, divides, but Christ unites. And I bristled against that statement because I thought, well, you can't have union in Messiah without teaching, because as soon as you say Christ or Messiah, you're dealing with a definition of who that is. Is he deity? Is he the Messiah? Did he fulfill prophecy? Is he coming again? So, of course, you have to be united by a common foundation of doctrine or teaching, obviously. But what I understood here was that apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, 5 different kinds of leaders would rise up, and that they would equip the saints to do the work of ministry. So this is very practical on a nitty-gritty basis. The goal of Fivefold ministry is to see that every person in Yeshua comes into their God-intended destiny, and that they fulfill the role that God has planned for them in the kingdom of God, in the body of believers. And that includes both within congregational life and outside of congregational life. We're to equip them to fulfill their destiny. So that's on a very practical, nitty-gritty, every member kind of basis. But we're also called to something lofty, and that is to see this unity. And you can see when you read about the epistles and disunity coming into congregations in Corinth, and in the book of Revelation, when there are the writings to the 7 congregations of Asia Minor, which is Turkey today, this concern for unity was something that the writings of the apostles were always passionate about. They were passionate to see the whole body in unity in every city, and then those cities connected to one another through the company of the apostles who tied them together in their travels. So I saw this, and we changed greatly the nature of what we were doing. We didn't start an apostolic stream. That came from a word that Asher had in 1984, when he said that he was going to go and plant a congregation. He was one of my elders at Beth Messiah Congregation in D.C. He was going to plant a congregation in Frederick, Maryland, 30 minutes to the north, and that Moishe Morrison had planted in Baltimore, that we would have 3 congregations, and that we were to be an apostolic stream and not join any one apostolic stream. And we confirmed this. This is Eitan Shishkoff and Eitan Shishkoff, Asher and Trader, myself, and Moishe on this walk. And we really didn't know the full implications of what we were doing, but we had this sense was that if we as Messianic Jewish congregation joined one apostolic stream, our influence would only be within that apostolic stream. That there was something about the Messianic Jewish movement was that we were to partner with and to influence all of the different apostolic streams that God would raise up in the last days. So, I want to say something about what I see today and then what we're doing. What I see today is that most apostolic streams are not yet passionate about this call to unity for one another. They believe that God has created Fivefold ministry, and the purpose of Fivefold ministry is to create strong movements of congregations and ministries. but they don't see that the primary purpose of apostles and prophets is to call the whole body of believers into cooperative unity. And because of that, apostolic streams have largely become the new mini-denominations. Now, I'm not worried about that because God's going to change it, and this can be a stage on the way to what God ultimately wants in cooperative unity. But there are some that are getting the full revelation of what apostles and prophets are, is that apostles and prophets are apostles and prophets of the unity of the body of believers. Now, this is something else that we came to see, and that is the unity of the body of believers does not work until you're connected to the Messianic Jewish part of the body and connected to Israel. You cannot have this John 17 unity without the Israel part. You can't have this John 17 unity without the Messianic Jewish part. And as our dear brother who just died, Father Peter Haken, taught, the first church split, the first major disunity, was when the Messianic Jews were rejected by the rest of the church, and that the church therefore has fragmented ever since that, and we cannot come back into the kind of unity that the Bible is calling for until we see the restoration and healing of the split between the Jewish believers and the rest of the church, which is the healing between the church and Israel. And as John Dawson said, that will be the biggest healing in church history. The head of YWAM, John Dawson, that'll be the biggest healing that there has ever been, and it will lead to the second coming of Jesus. Now, so the big vision is to see the Messianic Jewish movement embrace a responsibility for the unity of all the people of God. Now that's a tough one. The big issue is that the Messianic Jewish movement has to embrace a heart and vision for the unity of all of the people of God. And this is kind of huge. And I've been teaching for some years now I'd say the past 5-6 years, that the church, well, I've been teaching this part of it. The church is the parentage of the church is the Jewish people. The church was born out of the Jewish people. It's the internationalization of the gospel going to the nations in fulfillment of the promise of Abraham. But in teaching this, more and more revelation has come to us where we've begun to see that there is a special responsibility of the Jewish believers as connected to the parentage of the church to look at the whole church and all of its varieties as its progeny. And although we might think there is correction to be made sometimes, to not be, bashing the church and dealing with the church in a disdainful way because they don't see certain things that we do, that we have to approach the church in a humble way to see this kind of unity grow up. So I hope you're all with me on this, that we bear more responsibility for the unity of the church than anyone else. But on the other hand, the church has responsibility for unity. Everybody has the charge of Yeshua that we might be one. Everybody has that fivefold charge that we're all brought into unity from Ephesians 4. Everybody needs to care for this, pray for it, work for this. So it's something we share with the church, but we as Messianic Jews bear special responsibility. Now, at our last conference, Asher got this word that Abraham was called, the original Abrahamic covenant was to bring blessing to the nations. And therefore, it is our primary identity as Jews to inherit the nations. And if we believe that, then we have to not be gazing at our own selves and our own questions of authenticity so much, and we have to more be looking at not just who we are, but who we are in relationship to embracing the nations. And I believe that we embrace the nations and inherit the nations through embracing the churches, first of all, of the nations. And that this is a foundational point of the identity of Messianic Jews. That was an amazing thing when Asher brought that out at our conference. You know, we had the reception for this message was just dramatic, amazing. It was like a revelatory moment. It was like an earthquake. And there was just a tremendous shift. You could feel the shift that took place when this was announced. So, you know, it's a funny thing. We within the Tikkun family of ministries are not just like other Messianic Jewish streams. We're actually quite different. We really don't fit well. I mean, we cooperate with other Messianic Jewish streams, but we don't fit well. We'd like to fit better, but we don't fit because we've got this passion for the last days and eschatology and love for the church and the quest for unity. So this brings us to what we do. And by the way, in terms of any of the media folks, if you want me to break, I can break any time, but I'm fine. So let's come back and look at what we do. Well, you know, I find myself always ministering on a small level plane to the highest level plane, in the sense of the local congregation. And I do this less and less because I'm a limited being. But I still visit congregations that are connected to our network, and I try to do that here in Israel as well, and sit with leaders and talk to them about how to strengthen their programs in discipleship, preaching, small groups, prayer meetings, teaching, because our burden is that all the congregations that relate to us will be strong and will be growing. Now, I have to delegate that to a lot of other people. I'm becoming more like Paul to Timothy and Titus, you know, because Paul now has 2 apostles that he's raised up, Timothy and Titus, and he sends them out. And by the way, you'll notice that in the instructions to Timothy and Titus, he commands them to establish good teaching, to raise up others that can teach, and to call the churches into unity where they are, and to keep that unity. So he has very strong instructions to his apostolic associates that he raised up. And so now I have to a large degree, work through others, but I still go. And we have some good budding apostles. We've got some budding prophets. We've got an evangelist. And we really need to pray for a lot more evangelists. We've got a lot of pastors. It seems that's very strong. And a lot of teachers. You ever notice, by the way, that the body of believers is overweighted on pastors and teachers? We need more of the other 3. We have a relationship with Cheon. And we're talking to Che about cooperative unity. And Cheon has joined apostolic streams all over the world so that they would come into deeper cooperative unity. Apostolic streams join Cheon's mega apostolic stream. And they do things together for the whole thing worldwide. I can't quite figure out how it works, but it's enormous. And the thing is growing, and Cheon is a very strong leader. And I made some very good relationships with Cheon's leaders in Korea who are trying to get me to Korea to teach. And I'm going, oh my God, how can I spend time going to Korea to teach Cheon's folks? But I probably should eventually, but I don't know when. But this, by the way, this is always the challenge. But this is a matter of building the relationships between fivefold, restorationist-oriented networks in the church, and some of them are becoming very large, and seeing that come into the right relationship to the Messianic Jewish restoration. One of the things that's important about us is that we are overt and passionate in promoting this vision, both in the United States and here. And the nature of us promoting this vision does make us unique. Now, there are other people in Israel outside of our streams that do believe this vision, but they're not really promoting it. They believe it, but it's a little bit too risky to promote it right now, and people will eventually get there, but we believe it. But we have to take the lead, no holds barred, in saying, this is who we are promoting this vision. And right now, honestly, in Israel, I think we're the only ones in a strong way promoting this fully. But I believe there will be others with us. I see them already there that will be with us in this. But, so one of the interesting things that has happened now, very interesting, is that we, in the United States, started this fivefold restoration type of Messianic Judaism in 1984. Then in 1992, we sent Asher and Trader and Eitan Shishkov to Israel under the name Tikkun. And Tikkun was the name for doing development and to raise the funds and support for them to be established in Israel. And then they have planted works in Israel. And now there is a very interesting shift. Whereas previously, the American network was largely supporting the Israel network, or the Israel beginnings of planting and work. Now there is a shift, and we all see it in America. I don't think anybody in our network in America doesn't see this, that we are coming into a relationship where there is a priority of the Israel movement and a priority of Jerusalem in how we align ourselves. So although the people in Israel are not trying to dictate to the American network. We have our own team, our own governmental structure to run it. But we see ourselves as being in a submitted spiritual relationship to Israel, and that Israel has to be the head and not the tail. That's a very big thing. And the unity between the Messianic Jewish Restoration movement in Israel and in the United States is very, very important. But there are others as well. There are restoration movements in Ukraine and in other places, and we have to bring them into one restoration connected to Israel. So we spend time doing that. We spend time thinking about it. We spend time talking to people about it. And we make a lot of appointments with leaders to share this message of alignment and restoration.